Today we're talking about French. French has a reputation for having very complicated and strange ways of asking questions. But are they really that weird? Stick around and I'll explain commonalities across languages, how French fits in with all of that, and how French questions aren't really as strange as they seem at first glance. Students of French and the performatively anti-French will of course tell you that French questions are absolutely crazy. And at first glance it looks that way. For instance, to ask, "What is this?" it looks like you literally ask, "What is it that it is?" One of the things that most linguists will tell you, however, is that language is not necessarily always exactly how it seems. So let's set some ground rules. In linguistics, when we talk about language, we're talking primarily about speech. Writing is secondary and it's a technology that helps us keep track of speech, but it's not what we're really talking about when we talk about language. Not only is writing a sort of technology, but French's technology has skipped a few updates. French spelling is better suited to the way French was pronounced 300 years ago than it is today. That's not very different from English. Here, we'll use the IPA, the International Phonetic Alphabet, to keep track of what we're actually talking about. The reason for that is that the IPA has a one-to-one correspondence between individual symbols and the sounds they represent. Traditional writing systems for natural languages are much more complicated, and so you end up with a lot of symbols that all are pronounced the same, and some sounds that don't actually have symbols for them at all. So I'm going to use the IPA where it helps, and French spelling in other places where it's clear what we're talking about. The short answer to what's going on with French questions is that there's two things. One, question markers, and two, WH movement. But what does that mean? We'll have to dive into questions more broadly to be able to understand that. Questions come in two flavors, yes-no questions and WH questions. Languages will let you know what kind of question you're dealing with. American Sign Language, for instance, has raised eyebrows for yes-no questions and lowered eyebrows for WH questions like what or where. Mandarin Chinese marks yes-no questions with markers like ma at the end of the sentence. Arabic with hal at the beginning of the sentence. And Persian with aya. So that brings us to, how do you know a sentence is a question? One way that languages mark this is by having the exact same sentence, but a different intonation. That's a different pitch contour when you're speaking. An example would be the difference between David is afraid of moths and David is afraid of moths? Another way that languages mark questions is by having an overt question marker. This is a word or a sound that goes at the beginning or the end of a sentence and lets you know that the sentence is a question. Some languages put them at the end of a sentence, like Mandarin, so ni chirla is you ate, but ni chirlama is have you eaten. Other languages put them at the beginning or the beginning-ish of sentences. Formal Arabic, for example, uses hal. So the sentence, Anti min Misr, you are from Egypt, becomes hal anti min Misr, are you from Egypt? Lastly, you can move things around in the sentence. English does this a lot. So for instance, David is afraid of moths can become, is David afraid of moths? And you're hungry becomes, are you hungry? So that's yes-no questions, but there are also WH questions. WH questions are questions that use WH words. WH words are the words that replace a part of a sentence that you're asking about. In English, they all start with WH, which is why they're called WH words. That's who, what, when, where, and how. So you can have a statement, David is afraid of moths. But if you don't know what David's afraid of, you might ask, what is David afraid of? You can do this without moving the WH word. That's called WH in situ. And in English, it's called an echo question. David's afraid of what? In English, they start with WH, but in French, they might start with QU. In Zulu, they start with PH. I was actually thinking of Zulu location words. Zulu question words generally start with NI. WH words come in two flavors. There's in situ, where the WH word doesn't move, and there's WH movement. When we say WH movement, we're using declarative sentences as the yardstick against which we measure questions. So, David is afraid of moths becomes David is afraid of what? The what should be in the same place. When it moves, it's moving to somewhere else in the sentence, usually the beginning. You'll recall the beginning of the sentence is where we put our question markers or our auxiliary words in English, so is David afraid? As a quick tangent on Russian, yes-no questions in Russian feature a pitch raise, but WH questions don't because there's the WH operator. When Russian speakers learn English, they'll often speak English with the same kind of Russian question intonation. In the case of WH words, that's no question intonation at all to a native English speaker. For that reason, they sometimes come across as rude. So you can have the question, what is David afraid of? Or you can ask it the way that Moira would, of what is David afraid? In this case, that's called pied piping. Pied piping is when the WH word moves, but it takes other words around it with it to the front of the sentence. It's named that because it's named after the Pied Piper of Hamelin, who used his magical pipe to lure children away from the town and drown them. It turns out when you discover something in linguistics, you get to name it, and some people have way too much fun with that. Now that we've talked about historical spelling, and we've talked about questions, we have all the tools that we need to figure out how French questions really work. We can see past the spelling to how simple the questions really are. The short answer to what's going on with French questions is that there are overt question markers and there's WH movement. Let's start with a statement. You ate my chocolate croissant. Tu as mangé ma chocolatine. If we want to make it a question, we'll use the WH operator. What did you eat? In this case, you ate what? Tu as mangé quoi? Now, French has an overt question marker, pronounced est que. Its spelling preserves historical facts about how it came to be, but now it's a lot easier to just analyze it as being a single word that marks questions that's pronounced est que. We'll use that question marker and WH movement past that question marker to ask our new question. Qu'est-ce que tu as mangé? What did you eat? Now, French does this with fast speech forms as well. That's the last piece. We do the same thing in English, so we won't say, what did you eat? Rather, we'll say, what'd you eat? The takeaway from this is that if you study modern linguistics, you find that languages do the same small handful of things over and over again. Every language is drawing from the same bag of tricks. Chomsky used to refer to this as principles and parameters. To take one parameter, you can have question markers. You either have them or you don't. Another parameter would be if you have them, are they at the end of the sentence or the beginning? When you look at just question markers and WH words, you end up with 7 possible patterns. So these things multiply very quickly. Here's the cool thing about modern linguistics, though. Instead of looking at 7 different ways of forming questions and thinking that they don't have anything in common, we can reduce what languages do, cross-linguistically, to a much smaller number of parameters. And these parameters have a very high explanatory power. They allow us to categorize unfamiliar languages quickly and understand what's actually happening with them. The bottom line is when people tell you that languages do something that's bizarre or strange or weird or wrong, it's often an evaluation of the people, combined with some sort of justification, often from historical spelling or invented from whole cloth. In this case, yes, French spelling does retain a lot of historical information, which is sometimes confusing to a learner who's learning modern French. But when you look past the spelling, you find that French questions behave the same as questions in a variety of other languages. And even where they don't behave the same, they follow the same kinds of rules. So what do you think about questions across languages? Did I leave anything out? Leave a comment below. Thanks for joining me. If you like this video and you want to see more like it, please click the like button and think about subscribing. Until next time.